The war in Ukraine isn't just about Russia anymore. North Korea has entered the fight, sending thousands of troops to Kursk, but Ukraine isn't backing down. In fact, it has a plan to stop them before they can even join the battle. Between 10,000 and 12,000 North Korean soldiers arrived in October, and their presence has everyone talking. Russia is counting on them to retake Kursk. China is uneasy about this risky move, and NATO is stepping up its support for Ukraine. But Ukraine isn't intimidated, it's prepared. Instead of relying solely on firepower, Ukraine is turning to psychological warfare, a strategy designed to break the North Koreans' will to fight without ever meeting them on the battlefield. Early reports suggest the strategy is already working, with North Korean officers among the casualties and damaged equipment piling up. But can Ukraine's bold plan really succeed, or will these new troops make a difference for Russia? Let's take a closer look at Ukraine's psychological warfare tactics and why they might just win the day. The actual campaign that Ukraine has developed is an extension of an existing one called I Want to Live. We'll circle back to the origins and the effects of the campaign itself a bit later, as it was developed to be used against Russian soldiers and implemented differently. For use against the North Koreans, the campaign is relatively simple. The Ukrainian military will dispense a series of leaflets in Korean, complete with illustrations of the possible ramifications of the troops going into the battlefield. The leaflets will also provide detailed instructions on how to surrender when spotted by Ukrainian soldiers and drones. North Korean troops will be prompted to lie down with their faces to the ground, drop their weapons to the side, and hold a white sheet, or the leaflet itself. The leaflets are ostensibly going to be mass-printed and carried by the Ukrainian military everywhere they go in Kursk. Additionally, drones can be used to airdrop the leaflets behind enemy lines, targeting notable military compounds and training grounds that the Ukrainian intelligence has identified throughout Kursk and the neighboring regions. Ukraine is also taking a more direct approach to psychological warfare by employing South Korean experts. They could devise more comprehensive plans on how to reach the North Korean soldiers directly and bypass their higher officers. The officers could be there on the battlefield to provide control and oversight, then directly report to the North Korean government. These reports are likely influencing how the soldiers are being treated. If a soldier is found to be dodging their duties, a report might mean that their family would be in danger of being imprisoned in deadly prison camps. This would make them resistant to accepting any kind of foreign aid, lest officers believe they are defecting from the fight. This means Ukraine needs to develop a somewhat unique approach to influencing North Koreans, permitting the soldiers to surrender in a way that seems believable and without reproach from their commanding officers. This puts a few wrenches in the campaign and is likely why the program needed to diverge a bit from its Russian-oriented roots. One plan so far seems to involve drones in another way. Small commercial drones that could be fitted with speakers and repeat messages of what will happen to the North Korean forces in the oncoming days. If the Ukrainian intelligence is specific and accurate enough, they might be able to predict larger confrontations. Then the campaign would direct them towards certain actions, such as listening to orders just enough while incorporating Ukrainian directives. Essentially, it will be a weaponized form of malicious compliance. It could create enough openings for troops to surrender peacefully while being in the right place at the right time. Alternatively, the campaigns could use drones to constantly create diversionary campaigns during downtime. Contrary to popular belief, no part of the battlefront sees constant action. Fighting between Russians and Ukrainians is typically done in short bursts, with smaller campaigns pushing for more ground, which doesn't last long. Even then, soldiers might hunker down in trenches and wait for something to happen, or for more direct orders on movement or actions. The downtime is the perfect opportunity to manipulate enemy troops, especially if they're already on the front line. The drone warfare in the conflict is so extensive that most units probably recognize the sound of small aerial drones approaching them. If those drones deliver messages for Russian and North Korean troops to surrender, it could make some skirmishes less bloody. Not to mention, it would allow Ukraine to save precious ammunition and ordnance that would otherwise be used to destroy vehicles and pulverize enemy troops to dust. While Ukraine doesn't have a shortage of ordnance to throw at the enemy via drones, their budget could use the boost regardless. Finally, the project also involves creating instructional videos for social media channels like YouTube and Telegram, the latter of which is immensely popular in both Russia and Ukraine. While North Koreans likely don't have access to it, they could get second-hand accounts from their Russian comrades. In an ideal scenario, Ukraine's psychological warfare plan should at least see some of the North Korean soldiers turn away from combat and desert their posts. But why would they? Well, the North Korean military is in a precarious situation. There are two possible ways for North Korea to leverage its troops to aid Russia. The first is by sending some of their best troops to the war. Ostensibly, this would be done to gain much-needed direct experience in modern combat. You see, North Korea is one of the most heavily militarized nations in the world. It's estimated to have roughly 1.3 million active military personnel, making its army the fourth largest in the world, and almost tying it with the American military itself. Considering that North Korea has only around 26 million people, while the top three entrants on the military enrollment list, China, India, and the US, have population sizes of considerably more, it's a significant portion of their total population. To this, we need to add the fact that North Korea practically forces most men and women to serve in the military, and males need to remain in service for up to 10 years. This creates a huge number of reservists, with some analysts suggesting that North Korea could draft a third of the country in the event of a direct conflict. And yet the North Korean army is considered among the least prepared for modern combat. Most of its equipment comes from the Soviet era, and not the 1980s Soviet era when they started overhauling their vehicles to hopefully match Western designs. No, North Korean equipment still primarily consists of outdated models like the T-55 and T-64 tanks, which were considered obsolete decades ago and are now veritable museum pieces. While North Korea has recently unveiled a new tank design, such developments do little to overshadow its reliance on older, outdated systems. Ironically, Russia itself has been forced to use some of its stockpiled T-64s, as it has a surplus of them, and they weren't doing much in storage. The entire world took a few good looks at the tactic and immediately considered it an act of desperation. Additionally, while North Korea is technically still at war with South Korea, the conflict was frozen in 1953 when the Korean Demilitarized Zone was established. In the last 70 years, the country only experienced limited skirmishes that were not evocative of either side's military prowess and improvement. South Korea had allies like Japan and the US to significantly bolster its military, becoming one of the world's largest exporters of weapons. In contrast, North Korea only really has two major allies, China and Russia. Neither of those seem to have done much in terms of training North Korean troops or outfitting them with more modern weapons. Russia has used its weapons industry for national defense and to outfit various factions in the Middle East, which more suited its plans of countering the NATO presence in the region. China has only recently developed militarily in the past 2 decades. Even their native Chinese designs are still considered subpar compared to the US in pretty much every way, and barely match Russia's. This relegated North Korea to manufacturing weapons that it already had access to, or ammunition that didn't become obsolete nearly as fast. It ended up focusing on artillery round production, which mostly ended up going to Russia anyway, or trying to improve its ballistic missiles. The latter is one of the main reasons why Japan and South Korea are persistently wary of North Korean military ambitions, as both countries are so close to North Korea that powerful ballistic missiles can equalize the technological disparity in other aspects. The war in Ukraine therefore presents practically a perfect opportunity for North Korean troops to gain experience in modern forms of combat. Russian military equipment designs have changed relatively little since Soviet times, so North Korean soldiers don't need that much training to be able to work with and use Russian tanks or artillery. At the same time, North Korea can transport ballistic missile prototypes and valuable engineers for testing newer designs in real-life scenarios and against Western-style anti-air defenses. So by sending its best troops, North Korea might aim to leverage its defense agreement with Russia fully, gaining some goodwill while also working toward Russian President Vladimir Putin's goals. But then we come to the second possibility, and one that is much likelier based on the reports from Ukraine. Putin is going to use North Korean soldiers solely as meat shields, and their skill or experience won't actually matter. There are a few main reasons why this makes sense. Russia has lost a phenomenal amount of people. Most recent estimates by the Ukrainian intelligence, which is typically corroborated by Western sources, suggest that Russian casualties have passed 770,000 dead and injured soldiers in December. This is close to as many soldiers as the entire country had when the war started, and roughly 3 to 4 times the number of soldiers stationed around Ukraine in February 2022. By now, Russia is likely starting to heavily dip into whatever reserves of contracted soldiers it can get, all with the aim of gaining ground in Donbass. This means Russia is likely forced to cut its military drafting efforts short and offer actual contracts to mandatory conscripts. Why? Well, the country unofficially outlawed deploying conscripted soldiers abroad, only using them for national defense. At the same time, statistics from the Russian Ministry of Defense suggest that Russia is conscripting roughly 150,000 soldiers every 6 months. These soldiers technically have to go through a full year of service when they're considered conscripts and can't be used in the Ukrainian mainland. Previously, Russia stationed them in regions around Ukraine, which turned out to be a disaster when the Ukrainian army decided to invade Kursk, and the conscripts let them enter practically unopposed for 3 weeks. But now Putin may have run out of options and could start dipping into conscripts and reserve soldiers, offering ludicrous salaries for them to go to Donbass and try to push deeper into Ukraine. That leaves Kursk unmanned, which is where the North Korean troops come in. The wording of the Russian-North Korea defense agreement, which was signed in June 2024 and ratified in September, implies that North Korea is only obligated to come to Russia's defense if the latter's territory is directly threatened. This allows Putin to justify putting North Korean troops only in Kursk, as it belongs to Russia, since deploying them to Ukraine itself would likely create a series of international responses from NATO, its allies, and even China. But that's where the second problem comes in. Regardless of their training in the North Korean forces, the soldiers are, objectively, not going to be as well trained or equipped as Russians. Reports from North Korean defectors who were in the country's army a few decades ago pointed out that the average soldier is barely getting paid, has little access to food and water, suffers from near permanent malnutrition, likely can't get proper healthcare, and is often forced to work agricultural or construction work by the government's demands. These factors don't make a good soldier in any country, let alone one that presumably has military technology far below modern Western countries. As such, Putin likely doesn't count on or expect much from the North Korean troops. Instead, his tactic might just be to let them loose in Kursk with minimal actual orders and hope they soak up some of the bullets or ordnance that Ukrainians throw. After all, there's no mention of how many troops North Korea actually planned to send to Russia. Russia is paying the average monthly salary for each soldier it receives, with most of it going straight to the North Korean government. This is a huge incentive for North Korea to just keep sending more and more soldiers whenever possible, likely after the first batch has seen actual combat. Then there's the final part of the puzzle. North Korean forces know neither Russian nor English, the two main languages used in the Russian military. This is bound to cause significant tension between the Russian military and its North Korean additions. According to Ukrainian intelligence on Russian training sites for the incoming troops, the soldiers posited that North Koreans would need dedicated translators or constant supervision from higher officers for any meaningful transference of concepts and tactics. Without them, the Russian forces would likely only be able to teach them the basics and rely on simple commands and hand signals. This could severely detract from their actual performance in combat, leading to potentially devastating mistakes such as mispositioning or even friendly fire. And that final part is where Ukraine can swoop in. With drones blaring messages in Korean, the North Korean troops might grab onto them as a lifeline, overriding what few commands they receive from Russian personnel to try and save their own lives. After all, if these are not the best of what North Korea has to offer, then it's highly likely that the soldiers were forced to be there in the first place. The soldiers will be faced with a choice between death from above via Ukrainian drones, death from the front via artillery, tanks, or infantry fire, or an eventual escape not only from the military but from the entire North Korean regime. At that moment, whatever survival instincts or common sense the North Korean troops have retained after 8 grueling years of trying to survive in their military might prevail and cause them to jump ship to Ukraine. And the Ukrainian military seems to be ready to accept the North Korean troops with open arms. There's no real precedent on how North Korean defectors are treated outside of Russia, China, and the Indo-Pacific. While Russia, China, and a few other countries extradite defectors to North Korea, defectors often rely on Chinese brokers or smugglers to get to South Korea or further away from the Indo-Pacific. However, the European Union frequently treats North Korean defectors as South Korean citizens and denies asylum requests, with Germany and the UK being among the few countries with meaningful defector populations. The Ukrainian government hasn't made an official statement on how it plans to process any defectors it gets from its psychological warfare tactic. Presumably, Ukraine might treat the defectors as prisoners of war in the short term. After that, it would be up to the government to decide whether to transport the soldiers to South Korea or allow them to stay in the country and claim asylum. But what's the likely success rate of Ukraine's tactics? While North Korean troops have been spotted in Kursk in various reports, there are scant details about their actual training, positions, or extrapolated movements. There were only a few reports of clashes that involved Ukrainian soldiers or drones encountering North Koreans, and only on a small scale. This would imply Russia is still holding these troops back, presumably for additional training, or Putin might be working on a large, desperate push to retake the entirety of Kursk in one fell swoop. It's one tactic, and it likely won't work as planned, but there's no telling how Russia's military strategy might be conceptualized at this point. This means we're left with pretty much no meaningful details on the possible effectiveness of the I Want to Live project aimed at North Koreans, but we can extrapolate from its previous efforts to directed at Russia's own military. The I Want to Live project is much more varied when it comes to trying to swerve Russian soldiers out of the military. It's a multi-pronged approach that contains a detailed website and a hotline service that Russians who are deployed or scheduled to be deployed in Ukraine could contact for assistance. Then the Ukrainian operators would get their details and try to create an extraction point inside Ukraine where the soldier could leave the Russian military under the pretense of being captured. As you can see, the tactic of the North Koreans might be strikingly similar to the original plan for Russians, even if the contact medium is slightly different. Regarding the actual success rate of the campaign over the past 3 years, the matters get slightly more complicated. The pervasiveness of the campaign certainly aligned with the expectations, with an estimated 35,000 Russians contacting the service as of May 2024, while the website received around 50 million visits, although the latter is a much less useful metric to track. By the same month, around 260 people were extradited from the Russian military, with some believed to have decided to leave the country completely, while others plan to return to Russia when the war ends. Still, 260 out of 35,000 is not a particularly good exchange rate, considering that the campaign has been running for slightly over 2 years at that point. If we extrapolate the number to the reported 10,000 North Korean troops, we can get an estimate of around 75 people taking them up on the offer, if the rates are the same. Of course, these numbers won't mean much in a practical scenario. North Korean troops are in much different condition and circumstance, making their responses impossible to predict with any kind of certainty. But Ukraine being willing to try to save as many people as possible from going to war in the first place shows just how much trust they have in the program working. Even if only a few dozen people actually leave the Russian army and sign up for asylum in Ukraine, those still constitute lives saved in the long run. Then there's the possibility of crowd mentality working in Ukraine's favor. North Koreans are likely going to be deployed to the front line in Kursk soon, at which point they'll start getting pummeled, figuratively, by the psychological warfare tactics the Ukrainians are using. The constant exposure could lead to a few people deserting for greener pastures. After that, if Ukraine redoubles its efforts to showcase the initial success, more and more people might start following in those first few footsteps, and bit by bit Ukraine could undermine North Korea's presence in Russia from the inside. At that point, Putin will be left with one fewer option to use in the war, which only leaves him weaker on the global stage. But what do you think? Will Ukraine manage to score a small win with its psychological warfare plans? How many North Korean soldiers will defect to Ukraine? Thanks for watching, and leave your comments below.